Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Bob, do you want to come on up? And Hans, come on up. It's great to see you. So this next item is a good item that we're starting, and it's the Water Saving Hero Award for City of Turlock. As you know, we're trying to hit that 32% reduction rate that the governor set out in his executive order. And as you drive around town, our lawns are looking drier, our parks are looking great, but they're looking a little drier as well. Our medians, those are looking pretty shabby. So we're struggling, but at the same time, we're doing a great job and we're meeting that demand that the governor's laid out. And we wanted to highlight some exceptional water savers in the community. And it's just a complete honor to have the first one go to Covenant Village. They have just conserved so much. They're a great community. I love going to see you all, but you guys are really playing your part, and you're a huge instrumental part of our community. And to play this pivotal role in helping serve water is just a huge testament to how much you guys all value Turlock. So thank you so much, and let's give them a huge round of applause, please. Congratulations. Absolutely. Are we doing a picture? Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Zach.
Stand up. Here we go.
Perfect. All right, please take the microphone up.
And Fallon has,
Yeah,
Mayor Fallon,
Hans, you want to say
Fallon
something?
has those numbers.
Yes, and I think Bob actually has it as well,
Well,
as far as your conservation numbers.
400 and...
You're-
No, tell me
no.
what the city has.
We
We have our own numbers, but...
No, the city shows Covenant Village conserving upward of 5 million gallons from January through September of this year alone in their landscape water use. So that's an enormous amount of water, and we're extremely grateful for your
You bet.
efforts.
Well, you know, it's very, very important to us to be a real asset to the community and be a participant. Many of our residents grew up in Turlock, and they value the principles and the values that take place here. And as much as they love to see the green and the beautiful flowers, we've tried to prioritize what's important and minimize what's not, and this is what makes the difference. And thank you for recognition for our residents and for our staff, because it's very, very important that we're a good citizen in our community.
All right, thanks. To all the Stanislaus students, the gauntlet's been thrown by Covenant Village, so you too can earn that really cool plaque that you can put somewhere at Stanislaus, so I'm being serious. All right. Okay, moving on to item 2B, appointments to an ad hoc community signage committee. I am going to nominate myself as the mayor and Councilman Jacob to serve on that ad hoc community signage committee. What is the pleasure of the council?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Bubak, seconded by Councilmember Nascimento. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember DePart?
Yes.
Councilmember Nascimento?
Yes.
Councilmember Bubak?
Yes.
Councilmember Jacob?
Yes.
Mayor Floyd?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. And with all of our ad hoc committees, we will be bringing forward status updates throughout the process. Moving on to 3A, special briefings, California State University Stanislaus. Miss Maggie White, come on up. Or are you bringing your entourage of students? Absolutely. All right. Let's go. I think one of these meetings we all need to be wearing our ASI shirts, so that's a subtle hint that you gotta get some. Yeah.
First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Nicole Larson, the ASI president at CSU Stanislaus. I want to thank everyone here to help us get to this point where we can have this collaborative effort to come and say hi to you guys and kind of update you on some things that we're working on and things that we think that you guys should be well aware of as well. I want to introduce who's with me. So we have our board of directors here at CSU Stanislaus. So you guys can stand up and just go on the line, introduce yourself, what your position is.
Caesar, you gonna introduce yourself? Come on, you can't blend in, especially in a red shirt.
Okay, yeah, so that's our team. We're going to be going over just a few things, updating you guys on Stanislaus's outreach efforts that we've had on campus into the community and how visible we've been. Also kind of follow up on a conversation we had last time we met about the internship. We did a little bit of research on our side, as well as to try to continue the conversation of the transit system, and then further talk about maybe some developmental projects you guys have in mind that we can kind of, maybe get our foot in the door with collaborating on. So on campus, our outreach efforts have been through the roof in the past few years. First of all, in our Greek life, our Alpha Phi Omega service fraternity has been working a lot with Wakefield Elementary and other elementary schools for literacy awareness. We've also been working with the Turlock Library for adult literacy awareness as well, and have literacy nights there when they can help in the community and be visible, our Greek life be visible in the community. SAC, our Student Athlete Advisory Committee, has been extremely visible in our community as well. We've started anti-bullying campaigns in all the districts, all the schools in our school district in Turlock. We've basically gone to these elementary schools, have skits, talked to students about what bullying is, how to prevent it, and the students love it. And a lot of the principals and administration at those levels are very excited for us to continue this for the years to come. We also have Reading Day, where we collaborate with the basketball games and soccer games, where we have students and elementary school students bring books to the games, and they get in free with their families and their favorite book and get to talk about that at halftime. We also are very excited about our ASI's specific event that we put on, was the downtown event in Turlock, which was extremely successful. We brought around 500 students down to the downtown area through a transit system that met at our arena and then went to downtown. We ran out of all of our busing, free little bus passport things. We ran out of all of them. So it was extremely successful, and the students really loved it. And all of the downtown businesses, as we've met before and talked about, they were extremely excited about that. And hopefully we can continue this effort down the road. Another great thing that we have on campus, and that it helps us be extremely visible in the community, is our service learning department. And our service learning department is a department that basically holds co-curricular activities for students to get involved within a community units by helping the community. One of them that is really, a few of them that are really awesome, is our criminal justice internship opportunity. We basically go to local juvenile halls, and we had the opportunity, students get to mentor juveniles in that center, as well as the honors program, which I actually got to participate in. It was really awesome. We got to work a whole semester of creating a lesson of physics to teach fifth graders at the local elementary schools. It was a really great way to be visible, as well as to connect with leaders in the elementary school system and the school district as itself. We also contribute greatly to Turlock Together and the Warrior Toy Drive. That's around the city as well. And we also bring about 1,500 community members to our Science Day on campus. So there's a lot of great ways we do that. We also have a lot of internships through this program. So our criminal justice internship, like I mentioned before, we get students through the whole semester applying, and then we get to connect them to local attorneys' offices or the juvenile halls and detention centers and group homes around our community, as well as our sociology. We have an internship through them as well, and we would hopefully love to continue that internship with the City Council. So that brings me to my next topic, which is furthering an opportunity maybe to have an internship, a collaborative internship with the City Council. Doing research back on our end was the political science department and MPA department used to have kind of a system where it was kind of like we had students come in that were interested, and we would kind of figure out what they like to do and then connect them to the right people at City Council, connect them to the right people in whatever offices they wanted to go in around the city. But a great way to do that, the problem of it was that the interest varied so much between the students. So it wasn't a very consistent process, and students kind of got the luck of the draw with it, and if things opened up, it kind of happened. But through the service learning department, I think that we could really collaborate and have a more functioning system where we could, throughout the semester have like background checks here, and then, apply here, interviews here. We have this position here and here and here. So if that would be a route to go down, that would be awesome. But that's kind of where we are right now. We really want to explore. The need is there and the interest is there to get involved in local government. And it'd be awesome if we could work together to provide that for students.
Absolutely, that's awesome. The council member noted that you talk just as fast as I do, and
Oh gosh.
I like it. I understood every word. On the last point, city manager and maybe this is for Kelly Jacobs Hunter about the internship program and the opportunities.
We currently have a really strong intern relationship program with CSU that is happening through HR, through Jesse and HR, and we should really work to coordinate these ideas into that, because I think that pathway is already in place. It's just a matter of folding it together. That we should be able to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. So you're the one I'm going to come. Oh, good. Oh, yeah, she's the coordinator of our department. So that's good. So we can just have that advertising be better on our end as well. So that'd be better for us too. Awesome. Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that that opportunity specifically with the city council, and I will venture out on a limb and speak for the city council. We are trying to up our communication and our and kind of our research and thought process on a lot of decision making. So for political science majors, for political communications majors, we'd really love to have you come on board and help us and think outside the box. We're definitely looking forward for those types of students. So I think we're all excited about it. Internship program starting up here.
Yeah. Awesome. Good.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Or
we're going to move on to our next subject, unless you guys have anything.
Oh, I have a question for you.
Yeah, of course.
You want to share with everybody what's going on with the soccer team?
With the soccer team?
Yeah.
So,
you guys got any home games left?
So we're heading into. I'm also playing on the women's soccer team at Stanislaus. We're going into our last games right now. So our senior night is this Saturday on Halloween. It's at 4:30. We need to win our last two games, and then we'll have a seat in the CCAA conference. So these last two games are pretty big. Right now we control our own destiny, so that's always good to be in that position. But yeah, come on out and support. Our next game is Thursday, and then after that, our senior night is Saturday night. So hopefully see you guys out there. Okay, next one.
Absolutely. And while you're transitioning, you talked about Warrior Wednesday, and there was a great partnership, and that's something we talked about earlier with the City of Turlock, the Downtown Property Association, obviously CSU Stanislaus. And if you noticed that after you guys left, the downtown, everyone just loved seeing students down there so much they wanted remnants of it, so your banners are still up because we want to make sure that Turlock is denoted as Stanislaus State. It's your territory just as much as it's ours. So we're really excited to have that partnership continue, and hopefully something in the spring and fall, but we're all working behind the scenes, especially, Caesar.
Yeah,
perfect.
Exactly. Thank you.
Awesome.
Hello, my name is Carlene Dyer. I'm Nicole's executive assistant, and so I'm just here to touch up a little bit more about the transit system that did happen downtown. As a dorm student, I would have loved to have seen this a while back, and it's just been great. We had positive feedback from students. They mentioned that they've never seen the side of Turlock before. They're like, wow, I didn't even know we had that. And it's great for them to just hear those types of things. So it is a need, like Nicole said, that we would like to have the transit come through Stanislaus and take us downtown. The business loves that. It's just something that students love to see. So it would aid in sustainability, of course. I mean, students love saving gas. Hello. So it's just to help the community economically. So that sort of thing is what students like to see. Nicole, if she had it her way, she would have that every Wednesday. So we would love to see that more. And so we are in touch with the transit systems and trying to work with them and see what we can do best for Turlock.
Perfect. I see Director Pitcock nodding his head. Perfect. Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was just some positive feedback.
Perfect. Oh, you're finally up to the microphone. Here we go.
I'm back.
Yeah.
I'm back. Hello, Mayor and Council members. My name is Maggie White. It's nice to see you again. Those two are certainly a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best in these closing comments. We just want to thank you so much for this opportunity to come speak with you. We love coming out and representing our school. We're very passionate about student advocacy and student government. We appreciate your time very much and look forward to future opportunities to collaborate with all of you. We hope to stay involved with future conversations about developmental projects that can help link our students with the greater community, like the new grad housing that was approved on Monte Vista. Thank you again for your time and your attention, and I think that closes up our comments for the night, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments for CSU Stanislaus? Councilman Dehart, absolutely.
Always have a comment, man. I'd just like to give a shout out to the recent event that I attended this last Thursday night. Some of you students may be aware of it, some of you may not, some of the public may be aware, maybe not. But Turlock Union School District and the university participated together in a joint concert, choir concert, at Turlock High School. And I had the opportunity to attend that, and it was quite an event because I think anytime we can gather together the assets of the district and the city and the university and together as family enjoy an event like that, as did my wife and I think that speaks very well to the student body, to the organizations, to the people involved, and most of all to the students themselves. So thank you very much, and it was a great event. Keep your eyes and ears open for future events because that was special, almost as special as a soccer game.
Wow. Any other council members have any questions or comments? No, absolutely. Thank you so much. This is a great addition to our agenda. We really look forward to it every week or every time we meet. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Moving on to staff updates. Policy goals and implementation plan. Executive staff. Who's taking that one? City manager?
It does not look like there's any updates. We are aware of the impending deadlines that are in that plan, and we're working to meet them.
Perfect. And just to give an update, I'm not executive staff, but I was just in with Director Jacob Hunter, and the matrix or the timeline document that's going to be blown up for us to help keep track of what our deadlines are to meet these policy goals is well on its way. It looks great right now, so it's just a lot of detail and a lot of data to put into it. So that should be coming out in the next meeting or so, and so I'm very happy with how that's going. Absolutely needs an intern. Don't we all? Absolutely. Great. Good shameless plug. I like that. All right. Moving on to Highway 99 on and off ramp cleanup. Eric, Mr. Schultz, what's up?
Yes, sir.
And for those Stanislaus students that are here, no one got angry and made a bunch of holes in the wall. We're actually just retrofitting all of our equipment here, so it's just some of the poor mayor portraits back there are just missing because there's holes in the wall. Anyways, sorry, I said a comment. Go on.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council. I've got a little slideshow that's going to run while I'm giving a brief update on the 99 cleanup. We started this project in mid-September. We've been able to hit 4 of the major on-ramps and off-ramps in town. Through that effort, we've collected about 31 tons of trash and weeds that we've hauled away. Also want to thank Turlock Scavenger for their assistance with the removal of that. Moving forward on this, as you can see through the pictures, it was quite the endeavor. Moving forward for the city, our goal is to come back and hit one of these each week. There's a small cleanup so we don't get to the stage where we currently were. We spent, just on Lander in 99, it was about 100 man hours to get that cleaned up. We've already circled back around one time and hit this last week, and we're able to do the cleanup in 4 hours. So you'll see once we get these cleaned up and we're on our way, we have one more left. That's a major cleanup, but beyond that, we'll be able to do just one a week. We'll be able to hit them almost one a month and cut the time down and help make the city look a little bit nicer. Absolutely. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Yeah, Councilman Bublock.
It looks really great, but I'm hoping that we can send like a bill to the Caltrans and tell them thanks for doing their job or something.
Thanks for helping.
Yeah.
I know Director Pitcock and Van Gilder are meeting with Caltrans currently, coming up with a plan to help us move forward.
Yeah, Ron.
We hope not. If you see what it looked like prior to, we cut it down pretty low. There's a lot less there to burn, so we're hoping that that's going to help control and mitigate any of that.
The one thing I'll add is Caltrans did relay to us that they are planning to come back through and mow in the next week or two. So you should see the entire main line. They're going to come through. They tell me they're going to do some litter removal before they mow it. I hope they do. But you should see some of that activity here. They usually do that at night, so you may not see it happen, but you may get up in the morning and see some improvement.
And the goal is that our staff will work concurrently with them, so before they come in, we'll be able to do the litter pickup so they can just come in and mow.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think something should be noted that, you know, the staff stepped up here huge, and they're doing a job, as Councilman Bublock, or Councilwoman Bublock mentioned, that they didn't need to. This isn't their area, and meaning Caltrans needs to step up. And I know you guys have had meetings, and we're going to continue to have meetings. I sit on Stancock, and I've expressed these concerns with the Caltrans representative there. But the fact that staff didn't complain or ask for additional resources or try to get their way out of cleaning up these off-ramps, they just did it, and they made our city look great. It's a huge testament to the integrity and the caliber of people working here at the city of Turlock. It also, you know, I talked to him briefly. I saw him over on Taylor off-ramp, and I stopped and talked to him briefly. But, you know, yes, it's just good aesthetically. It looks great. But for economic development purposes, we talk about it all the time. It's what is the first impression as people come into our town, whether they're going to relocate a business, stay here as a business. And so that it's a huge thing. And no one stops and says, oh, there's litter there. You know, it's a Caltrans issue, but City of Turlock's great. No, they just see litter, and they just see weeds and debris. And so it is a huge thing, and I'm really impressed, and can't thank them enough. I think the city manager and I, we've talked about it a lot, and we're very impressed. Yes, Ron. Mm-hmm. Do you want to take?
They do. That's part of their cleanup project. It just doesn't happen as frequently as they would hope it does.
Mm-hmm.
And moving forward, I know as the city, when we do volunteer cleanup projects, that'll be some of the key things that we focus on. I think we'll work with Caltrans on that also when they have volunteers. They're just, the resources are stretched a long way, just like everybody else's.
In my opinion, too, and this is me talking to Caltrans, sometimes that gray area of jurisdiction, who owns, whose responsibility is it, means no one is taking care of it, meaning Caltrans should be, but they're not, and then maybe the city is thinking the Caltrans is going to be doing it, they say they're doing it, so it becomes this gray area, and then you add in the mix of someone adopting an area. So I think clarifying that is huge, and that's what Director Pitcock and Director Van Gilder did the other day, and we're on that road. Director Pitcock, you have something to add?
These areas were definitely in the Caltrans area of their maintenance effort. They were very appreciative of the effort that we did, and they were not concerned whatsoever with us continuing to do this on a weekly basis. The only thing they asked is that we don't take things down the dirt, but that we leave it, the weeds and the brush at 4 inches, because you don't want to have soil sloughing off during rain events.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, but at the same time, we need to also recognize that city staff, it's, you know. We'll
fill you in.
Notice I stopped in that sentence, but yeah, we'll talk later.
We're talking later. We have some ideas what we want to do as a staff, and we're going to put together, try to get a game plan that Caltrans and the city can live with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key component of this too, and I don't want to take away from this specific cleanup effort because that's what we're here to highlight, but also something too is that Turlock Scavenger takes a lot of all this for free. And so this is something that we're able to take over there, and that's a huge benefit to the city and community, and that should be noted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 31 tons they helped us dispose of
31 tons.
last month, yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Any other questions or comments from the council other than our joint pride in the crews for doing this?
Thank you for the kind words. I'll make sure I share that with the individuals who did the hard work out there.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving on. Public participation. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the council on any item of interest? All right, seeing none, we'll close public participation. Moving on to motion waiving reading of all ordinances on the agenda except by title. Second. I have a motion by Councilmember Bublock, seconded by Councilmember DeHart. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving on, declaration of conflicts of interest and disqualifications. Looking left, looking right, seeing none. Moving on, consent calendar. I would like to make a note that there's a green sheet for item 5B, which is the minutes from the last meeting. Other than that, are there any items that would like to be removed for separate consideration? Left and right, seeing none. What's the pleasure of the council?
That's consent.
All right, so we have a motion by Councilmember DeHart, seconded by Councilmember Jacob. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to final readings. 6A, clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to 7A. I'm going to let Debbie set this one up. It's a long title. So,
It's always nice to have someone else read the
I
title.
know. See, you had setup time. You thought I was going to read it for you. Throwing you for a
There we
loop.
go.
Yeah.
Oh, I can do it. It's fine. It's hard to do though when you. Okay, the item before you today is the expansion of the Turlock Walnut Company. They are looking to basically expand their business by roughly twice what it currently is. Currently, they're operating at 400 D Street, which is about a 3.2-acre site, and they are now expanding onto a site that is located at 400 D Street. These facilities will operate together as though they're one unit. And they will continue to have the packing and the cold storage and the warehousing activities, but they will be obviously able to accommodate quite a bit more activity with the expansion area. This gives you an idea of the site plan for the proposed expansion area that will be at 400 3rd Street. You have a 62,000 square foot warehouse, packing facility, cold storage area. There is a roughly 900 square foot fumigation building, and then the existing office that is located on the site is about 2,500 square feet, and they will continue to operate in those buildings. The area that most of the trucks will come into is located at 3rd Street. This will be the primary truck entrance, but they will utilize the D Street entrance on occasion when they have their high production season, and they will use the existing 400 D Street property basically to stack vehicles while they are waiting to get onto this site. So that way they won't have any traffic that is going to be backing up onto D Street. The elevations that are being proposed are quite nice for an industrial style building. You can see that they've integrated landscaping into the overall look of the building. They have some very nice treatment at the bottom with some stone treatment, and are integrating some decorative panels along the walls of the building. The item that is actually before you today is for the approval of the plan development. What a plan development is a deviation from the existing zoning district standards. This is an industrial zoning district. What they are asking for is a deviation from the required front and corner side yard setbacks. Typically in an industrial district, they are required to maintain a 20-foot front or side yard. In this case, they're looking for everything from 12 feet to, say, 17 feet. But what we are basically asking for the City Council to grant them is the ability to move that front yard and side yard setback so that they can accommodate the size of the building. And that's really to react to some of the conditions of approval that have been established for the project. The basis for the Planning Commission recommendation is basically that the surrounding development has very little or no setback from the property line. So when you look at the typical development within the area, you see this kind of building, which is basically right up at the property line. You may have some sidewalks that are located there, but generally the buildings are very close to the public right-of-way. In processing this application, really the request for the plan development itself for the exemption from the setback requirements, there was some discussion about two of the conditions of approval. The applicant requested that they have an exemption from installing sidewalks along this property. Has three sides that basically face onto the public right-of-way. So the applicant was requesting that they not be required to install sidewalks along the periphery of the project. They also requested an exemption from undergrounding utilities. In the zoning code, we have a very kind of strict standard that says that all utilities shall be undergrounded. And what we have been doing, the Planning Commission, and kind of looking at some of the requests that we have gotten for this type of exemption with other projects, is the Planning Commission is in the process of reviewing that requirement to determine whether it makes sense in infill areas for us actually to require that this be done. It tends to be fairly expensive. And also when you have existing development that is surrounding a project, sometimes it's very difficult to actually install the utilities underground and actually achieve any visual benefit from it. So the Planning Commission is looking at this particular standard, and as such, we've included as one of the options in the staff report is that you look at establishing a condition of approval that is not in the current resolution, so you would have to add it, that would allow them to basically defer this item until such time that the Planning Commission and the City Council make a recommendation on either keeping the current standard or making any revisions to it. Staff is supportive of that condition being added to the project. The Planning Commission did not add that particular condition, but we really didn't have a discussion about it either. The other item, though, about installing sidewalks is that staff has been relatively firm kind of on this particular issue. We just adopted our active transportation plan, which is to promote walkability and bikeability here in the city of Turlock. So when projects like this come forward, this is one of the few ways that the city has to actually seek the kinds of improvements that are going to help to make Turlock a more walkable and bikeable community. This is actually a graphic that was presented by the applicant. What they would like to do is really have the standard on the right, which is at their current location at 400 D Street, where you basically have the curb, and then you have landscaping, and then you have the building area. What they have at the 400 3rd Street site is basically a situation where the curb is right along the property line, and they would like to basically install landscaping in that area that you can kind of see the gravel. What staff would like to have the City Council consider, though, is that the sidewalk area and the additional improvements that are required could actually be done more toward the middle of the street. The city engineer does have in the general plan the ability to deviate from the standards that we have for streets, and so this would allow for us to install the sidewalks, not impact the developable area, the envelope, that the developer could actually install all of their building improvements, but would allow for the construction of the sidewalk area. The Planning Commission recommended unanimously that the City Council approve the plan development, but they did not approve the requests for the exemptions that the applicant was seeking. So the recommended action that we have before you is to determine that the approval of PD 273 is exempt from CEQA, introduce the rezoning ordinance, and then at your next meeting you would have the second reading and then the action on the conditions of approval.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions or comments for Debbie at this time? Yes, Councilman DeHart.
Debbie, thank you very much for the presentation. I do have a question with respect to the setback of the building from the curb.
Mm-hmm.
What is the likelihood in future developments that there's going to, whether it's in that area or similar areas, where that particular request may be made and may serve as a deviation from what our standard is, and are we in fact moving in the direction of creating a whole new standard? For some sort of consistency, I think, is what I'm really driving at. Any thoughts on that? Have we gotten to the point where that's been discussed, or is that next meeting?
Well, no, actually, an item that's on your agenda later is to consider an update to our downtown plan. One of the things that we have been looking at in our downtown is to create setbacks that are more conducive to a downtown environment. Often our standards are more applicable in suburban type environments, but not necessarily in our downtown area. And I think this is why staff has been supportive of this request, is that if you look in the downtowns, very often you have buildings that are right on the property lines. You see this all along Main Street. So that's a little bit more consistent with a downtown type of development pattern. And so I think in the future what we'll probably see is moving more into the direction of reducing those setback requirements, but that of course would mean that we would have to overhaul the entire downtown plan to be able to do that.
Okay. And then secondly, and very closely related to that, I didn't quite understand what you were saying with respect to moving the sidewalk out into the street. Could you comment on that again?
If you look at the area here, you can see where the curb is located right along the property line here. And so essentially what we're looking at is that instead of the improvements would typically be done within this area and behind the curb face, and so your sidewalk might run along this area of the property, but that would actually reduce the amount of envelope that they have to put in their building. So instead, what we're looking at is the improvements going toward the street and reducing the size of the street area so that instead of being as wide as it currently is, it would actually reduce the amount of pavement that you have for vehicles to operate on.
Well, and thanks for the clarification on that. That's actually a concern that I would share, that if this particular area, I don't know what size trucks try to navigate through, but if it's a shorter or a narrower street, have we given thought to that?
I'll defer to the city engineer, but yes, we have looked at that, and I actually went out and drove it again today, but the roads, the actual pavement area is quite wide in these areas and quite a bit wider than some of the other streets that serve this area, but I'll let Mike respond to that.
They could always put the sidewalk in its more traditional location. What we're offering them is an opportunity to have a wider landscape area as they preferred. And one of the options would be to reduce the width of the drivable area of the road by 5 feet and basically push the curbs out and build a sidewalk in that 5-foot area. Do we have plenty of width? Yeah. That area in the downtown, even with truck traffic, we have plenty of width to carry the truckloads.
And lastly, Mayor, it just seems to me that this particular photograph shows it better than most. The condition of the roadway in this particular case is such that if we're talking bike lanes in this area and sidewalks, what would be the plan to mitigate some of those issues? Well, the road itself is in disrepair. It's one of those, the entire industrial area, the old industrial area over here, is in dire need of rehabilitation. And there is no bike lanes associated with this project. This is really more of a discussion on pedestrian access and sidewalks. We're not requiring the developer to mitigate the road in this case. We're just saying it's an existing condition. There is a condition that says that if you are going to be pulling more than 3 trenches in the road, that you would be required to overlay, but we have to see what the design shows, whether they're going to be doing that. If they can figure out how to get utilities to the site without making all these trenches, they wouldn't be required to do the repair. I guess my concern is it's kind of like putting a bow on a pig. If we put a nice navigable sidewalk on bordering a street that's in ill repair or disrepair. Absolutely, and you're absolutely correct. That road is in disrepair and it is in dire need of improvement, but the funding is not available at this point in time.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councilman Knoxville.
Just a point of clarification, Debbie. So if we wanted to give them the option to do the sidewalk in the existing roadway, we would need to make an amendment to the resolution to allow for that?
No, you would not, because the city engineer already has that authority under the general plan to deviate from those standards.
Okay, so what action would you need from the council to allow this to happen?
There would be no action that is required.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, any questions or comments from the public on this item? No questions or comments from the public? Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Mike Warda. Turlock Wallet asked me to show up today and speak to them about the project and answer any questions. I've got a pretty good picture of the street. I don't know if it'll show up on an overhead if you want to see it. I have it. If you don't care,
we can use the machine. Pretty archaic, but we can figure out.
So essentially, the request to not underground the utilities is something that we've worked with staff on, and along the project boundaries, we will underground the utilities, so that's no longer an issue. What we're asking for is, that's the road. It's not great, but it is really wide. So you don't have to worry about trucks being able to turn around. But it's not really, this area is really not where you see bicyclists, not really where you see a lot of pedestrian traffic. It's industrial. This project, I think, is probably the largest project that's been built in the industrial area in probably 40 years. So it's really nice to have somebody investing in this area of town, and it will, I think, encourage others to come into town. There's some vacancies that are there. So there are some really great businesses that are there, and there's some properties there that are in pretty bad shape, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. So hopefully with Mike Pitcock's approval, we can get the ability to, with the utilities, bring them in over the street, and then once they hit the property, they'll go straight down and they'll be underground throughout the project. The other thing that we asked, and I think we're okay with, is getting 5-foot sidewalks instead of the 10-foot sidewalks, because the 10-foot are just pretty wide for that area, and again, there's really no pedestrian traffic. It's just meeting a city standard. The final thing that we spoke about was maybe deferring the installation of the sidewalks on the numbered streets on the side of the project. If you look on both sides of the project on the numbered streets, there is no sidewalk on either side of the projects. So it's a big expense at this point to add that at the beginning of the project. Along C Street, the applicant is saying, we'll go ahead and install the sidewalk there, but if we can have a period of time to install the sidewalks on the side, and I think we talked about maybe a deferred improvement agreement that's approved by the city and puts a cap on it, and I think the cap that we talked about with the city was like a 10-year cap. But if somebody on either side comes in and puts in sidewalk, then we would put in the sidewalk together with them. But ultimately, there'd be a 10-year cap on that. Because, again, on either side, in any direction of this thing, there really isn't any sidewalk out there in that area. In some places that are not too far, you've got residential that has some sidewalk. The city installed sidewalk on its project, where the big water tank is out there. But even that is sort of, it's not really connected to anything yet because it's adjacent to vacant properties. So I think this is a big and nice investment in this area, and I think it'll help because it'll help people when they come to the area to say, okay, I can see where this is headed. There's nothing but positive that I can see coming from this. If you have any questions, Victor Pedroza is here also as a representative.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Warda? Councilwoman Bublack.
So for clarification, I believe that you're speaking to the letter streets that you want.
Did I go backwards?
Yeah.
Well, that's why everybody else is here except for me. Yeah. Yeah. 3rd Street? Correct.
Any other questions or comments or clarifications? Yes.
I'd like to hear from staff about sort of those proposals and kind of it sounds like it's been a discussion that's happened, and just kind of get your input on whether that works for us.
As far as the 5-foot sidewalk, yeah, absolutely we'll support that. As far as the reduction in the width of the road to support the sidewalk, we're supportive of that. 7-2-202 of the municipal code does require the installation of sidewalks, but if the council so choose to defer or put together a deferral, we would recommend that you record a lien agreement on the site, that we give the developer a certain period of time, whatever the council would come up with, to construct the sidewalks, that I would set the value, if for whatever reason at the end of the 10-year period the city was to have to do the work, that I would set the value and tie it to a index like the ENR or the CPI, that we would also require that the developer pay and cover all attorney's fees associated with us having to go after 10 years and require the installation, or after whatever number of years. And then basically what we'd end up doing, we'd write it in such a way like we do our deferred fees, where it would be a lien. I would imagine the city attorney would have to verify this, but it would be a lien on the property that we would collect like undue paid taxes and go through that process. So we could, essentially, we hope that they would come through and finish it and do it, but we have to, put the city in the best position available in case they would fail to make that installation.
Additional comments or questions? Yeah, Councilman Nascimento.
Just to follow up, Mr. Warder, are you okay with those conditions if that's the way the council chooses to go? Yeah. Okay.
Councilman DR.
And then I guess the only other point of clarification would be 5-foot sidewalk may be acceptable to the Walnut Company. But what about the neighbor that would prefer the 10-foot? I mean, in other words, have we the latitude? Are we looking for consistency by our action here? What?
In this case, the 10-foot, I would say the 10-foots are more appropriate in a commercial area where you're having a lot of pedestrian walking. You got people pushing strollers and those type of activities. In an industrial area like this, I believe 5 feet is sufficient, as long as it meets the ADA requirements. that any and all pedestrians could use it. I think that's all that's really necessary.
Well, I think I would agree with that, Mike. I'm not in disagreement
It
whatsoever.
doesn't mean that the developer next door could put, he wants 10, he could put 10. That's not a big, but I would imagine if we start this at 5, everyone's going to follow suit.
And I would be looking for that point of consistency that says, does this council need to act each and every single time
No.
somebody wants to switch between 10 and 5?
Now, I have the authority to make these minor modifications to our standards, and I do it quite frequently when I have a situation that even though our standard says it's an 8-foot or a 10-foot, but there's 5 on both sides of it, I always tell them to put 5 in. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to have this little island in the middle that has something different.
Thank you.
Don't let that authority go to your head, all right? Jeez.
Trust me, I don't use it very much.
All right. It's like Director Van Gilder closing our parks whenever she wants. I mean, power-hungry staff. All right, I'm kidding. Any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments from the public? Actually, it's still public comment. All right. Yes, please come to the microphone. If you want to give your name, that'd be great.
Joshua Mallory. I live here in Turlock. And my question, and I don't know much about it, but what is the use of having a standard if you don't stick to it? And just because there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic at present doesn't mean there wouldn't be down the road. And it seems short-sightedness to view it just from a economic standpoint. I don't know about the economic factors involved, but I've been a pedestrian. I like to take my family for a walk. We go bike riding, and we do stay away from the areas that a little run down, but who knows what kind of foot traffic, bicycle traffic could come down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Follow-up? All right, I will close public participation and bring it back for council consideration. Councilwoman Bublak.
So I went out there today and I walked around, and it's the street definitely, a bow wouldn't even help it, Mr. DeHart. The 5-foot would cover the shopping carts. That was the only things that I saw out there. So it's not, I didn't see any pedestrians. It's not somewhere I would have walked without my weapon. But it's, when we look at it from the standpoint we want to help a business, and you look for the long haul, I think this is a good opportunity. I do think that standards are important, and I don't think that that's going to be an area where you want to walk your kids when big trucks are coming by and stuff spewing off of it. I do want at least a 10-year at the maximum for the client to have to put that in, if not sooner, if asked by the city. And I appreciate the extra extrapolating how much it would cost from today until later. But I want to make sure that there is in that clause that if the city needs it now, there's other businesses coming in and they're doing something, that we're all on track at the same time, so that it becomes the picture we want ultimately. And with that, I'd be interested in, I guess I have to introduce the motion separate. Is that correct? Okay, I'll introduce the motion.
All right. Second. Okay, that was quick. All right, we have a motion by Councilwoman Bublak, second by Councilmember DeHart. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries 5-0. And we have a point of clarification from Councilmember Bublak.
And the clarification is in regard to the sidewalk, it would be for the letter streets, not the number street, just so we know we're there. And I'll introduce ordinance.
Okay. Do I have a... There it is. Yeah, we have a motion by Councilmember Bublak, second by Councilmember Nascimento. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, ordinance carries 5-0. Thank you so much. This will be acted upon on the November 10th, 2015 council meeting. Correct. Do I also need to introduce the resolution? Not this time? Yeah, perfect. All right, we're moving on to item 7B. A request to determine the approval of the 2014 to 2023 housing element and adoption of the general plan amendment 2015-01. 2015-01 is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Section 15162 and/or Section 15262 of the CEQA guidelines, and request to adopt the 2014-2023 year 2014-2023 housing element and amending the Turlock General Plan. Debbie.
Trying to ruin the microphone.
Absolutely. As I read this, the wheels turning in my head. You can just I'm doing sections or years. I'm trying to figure it out. So.
Well, I'm going to turn over the microphone very quickly to Sophie Martin with Diet Body. She's going to walk you through the housing element update. This is more of a technical update to the housing element. As you know, we haven't had a lot of housing production. We wish we had more. But we haven't had a lot, and in recognizing the fact that there has been very little change in the amount of housing that's been produced, the state has basically allowed for us to go through more of a kind of a strikeout and addition for this housing element. So Sophie's going to explain that to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Sophie Martin with Diet and Bhatia, Urban and Regional Planners out of San Francisco. I've been assisting the city with the update to its housing element. I have a brief presentation for you this evening before asking you to take action. We'll go over the purpose of the housing element and objectives of this evening, some background information that informs it, an overview of the housing programs, which will be brief because most of them are the same as before, but there are a few key differences that I'll point out from the last one. Summarize the public comment that we did receive on the element, including that from the Planning Commission, who we saw a month or two ago, and then go on to our next steps of review and certification. So, to provide a little bit of background again, the housing element is one of the 7 required elements of your general plan. Unlike the rest of the general plan, which may be adopted at any time or updated, amended up to 4 times per year and comprehensively updated at the city's discretion, the housing element must be updated according to state law that is set by the Department of Housing and Community Development. It goes in cycles. The last one that we did was for the period of 2007 to 2014. This one extends from 2014 to 2022. It's a little bit longer of a period. The reason for that is because the time period has been adjusted to better match with when jurisdictions prepare their regional transportation plans so that planning for transportation and housing go hand in hand. It's the only element of the general plan that is reviewed by and must be certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as HCD. The planning period that we're referring to is from the end of 2015 through December 31st, 2023. HCD is also quite specific in terms of what needs to be in the housing element. It must contain an overview of the city's housing needs, a profile of it demographically, socioeconomically, an inventory of land and resources that may be used to develop housing in the future, an analysis of constraints that may exist that might inhibit housing production, a review of accomplishments of the previous housing element period. What goals did the city set out before? Were they accomplished? What was successful and what was not? How much housing was produced? Quantification of your objectives for the next planning period. And finally, goals, policies, and programs that you will adopt this time. The process is such that the city prepares the draft housing element. That's what I've been assisting with thus far. The Planning Commission reviews and the City Council will adopt the housing element. The Department of Housing and Community Development will review it. They have a 60-day period in which to do so, and then we'll have a series of conversations with them in which we'll go over any comments or changes that they may have to ensure that it complies with state law, addresses all of their requirements. And then once it meets their standards, they will certify it. If there are any substantive changes that HCD requests that the document incorporate as a result of that review, it will come back to you again at that point. I'll briefly go over some of the background research that has informed the housing element update this time, beginning with the needs assessment, which, as I mentioned, covers demographic trends, overpayment, how much are people paying for housing, and what percentage of that income does it constitute. If there are any affordable housing units that are at risk of conversion to market rate units, which would represent a loss of affordable housing in the community, any substandard conditions in the city's current housing stock, which might point to a need for rehabilitation, and also specifically the needs of a variety of special needs groups that HCD also identifies. This includes the elderly, the homeless, single parents, farm workers, large families, and others whose situations may result in them having very specific housing needs that we need to make sure that we're covering, as well as other people in the city. We have seen somewhat of a slowing in Turlock's population growth over the last 15 years or so. While Turlock grew steadily up until the point of the recession, like many other jurisdictions in California, there's been a bit of a drop-off since that time, and the city has experienced only a very incremental growth in population since 2010. The group that has shown the most growth in that time, not surprisingly, is the baby boomer generation from 45 to 64. Again, very common in cities throughout California, and does have consequences for the types of housing that people need as they age, which is something we need to keep in mind. Census data also points to a decrease in overcrowding in households or in housing units since 2000. However, this is a really good example of where some housing data needs to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, and why it's important for us to reach out to the community and get a better sense from their perspective of what their housing needs and experiences are. While the census may tell us that from a numbers perspective they're reporting less overcrowding, so that means like, you know, multiple generations or multiple families all sharing one home. Anecdotally, we hear that overcrowding still very much is an issue, and a lot of that stems from the period in which Turlock and many other cities experienced a lot of foreclosures. People lost their homes, they've been doubling or even tripling up in other people's homes, and that may or may not be reported. So that's an instance where, you know, we need to be careful with the data. We do still see a substantial need for affordable housing in Turlock. A good rule of thumb for how much households should be paying for housing is about 1/3 of their income going towards housing costs. If you're paying, and that by housing costs, that also includes utilities. If a household is paying more than about 30% of their income towards housing, they're considered to be overpaying. If you are paying more than 50% of your income every month towards housing, it's a substantial housing payment burden. And we do see that over 50% of renter households in Turlock are overpaying. Over 1/3 of owner households in Turlock are cost burdened. And 85% of very low income households in Turlock are also overpaying. So the need is still very much there. Going on to some of the other special needs groups that we identified, I mentioned before the increase in households with older individuals. The number of households with seniors has been steadily increasing. About 45% of the disabled population is also elderly. Those tend to go hand in hand, though not a guarantee, but another thing to keep in mind when we think about the design of housing and housing needs of all segments of the population. Turlock actually has a very good supply, relatively speaking, of rental housing that is suitable for larger families. You're lucky in that respect. It's an issue that many places contend with, where the affordable housing is all studios or one-bedrooms, and if you are a lower-income family with many children, a one-bedroom apartment is not suitable. Turlock, the need is somewhat reversed. There is a greater need, we see from the data and have also heard from some community members, for housing, affordable housing that meets that smaller household requirement, a studio, one bedroom, an SRO. There are actually quite a few units that are suitable for larger families. And then we also take a look at female-headed households. Female-headed households with children in Turlock, over 80% of them are below the poverty line. So this is a significant need. Farm workers, this is a category that HCD requires that everybody looks at, regardless of whether you have farmland in your city or not. In Turlock's policy has typically been to leave farm worker housing specifically to Stanislaus County. There are a number of farm worker specific housing developments in the county. At the same time, the city's zoning does allow for farm worker housing to be built within Turlock, should anybody desire. The homeless is the last category that we took a close look at. There was a point-in-time homeless count that was last done in January of 2015, at which 186 homeless individuals were identified. That represents 13% of the county total. And of those, 38% of them lived in Turlock before becoming homeless. The remainder lived other places. It is important to remember that a point-in-time count is definitely not going to capture all instances of homelessness. While many of the homeless individuals that we see around are the chronically homeless and they're more visible on the streets, it's very important to remember that many people who experience homelessness only experience it for a few days at a time, in between an eviction, finding a new place, and so on. So this is most likely an underrepresentation of the homeless experience in Turlock. Moving on to constraints, these typically fall into two different categories, governmental and non-governmental. Governmental constraints are the types that the city has some element of control over. Zoning, development standards, and enforcement, requirements for on or off-site approvals, such as installation of sidewalks, fees and exactions, and the permit process. How onerous is it? Is it streamlined? Non-governmental constraints are ones that we need to acknowledge, but that are more difficult for the city to do something about. Those include environmental constraints, financing availability, the cost of land, the cost of housing construction, and market conditions, of course. Of the governmental constraints that were identified in Turlock, what we heard this time and what we've heard the last time that we did the housing element is fees. Everybody always points to fees. Turlocks are higher than some other neighboring cities. That is because you are a full-service city. Your fees are recovering costs for all city departments, not just planning. Development impact fees are also can be quite high. We know that they are specifically designed to capture all of the impacts that are associated with housing. There are additional fees for school districts and certain master plan and specific plan areas. So it's something that the city understands is necessary, but at the same time can certainly pose a burden to development of affordable housing in particular.
Really quickly, sorry to interrupt. Where are the deferrals happening for some of the fees that we're looking at for development? Are these the fees that we're looking at, or
the CFF fees, and well, pretty much all fees are associated with a building permit for a single-family dwelling, whether it's whether it's for profit or for a nonprofit, or whether it's for people with higher income or lower income. It's the same fee preferred deferral program.
Got it. Okay. Just want to give you that plug real quick. Sorry to. You wanted a drink of water. See, this is why I did it.
Perfect. Thank you. Absolutely. And we'll get to fee deferral in just a moment. Stay tuned. Housing for the homeless is another area in which many jurisdictions have encountered constraints or have inadvertently or otherwise created constraints for housing the homeless. Turlock is not in that category. The action that you took following adoption of your last housing element in 2012 by establishing the emergency shelter overlay zone has met state requirements for that. It is viewed very positively by the organizations in the city that do work with the homeless and that aim to provide shelter services. So you're in good shape there. Moving on next to the land and resource inventory, the housing element does need to include an inventory that identifies sites that have the potential to be developed with housing in the future. The sites need to be zoned appropriately to allow residential development. They need to be served by infrastructure, so just pointing out to a big field and saying that's where housing can go at some point doesn't quite count in HCD's minds. And we also need to identify any financial resources that may be available to assist those in developing affordable housing. It's important to remember that when we talk about an inventory of housing sites, that A, generally speaking, it is not going to be the city itself that is developing housing. B, that there is not a requirement that all of this housing be built over the planning period. Instead, it's really just a matter of identifying opportunities where housing may be built by other organizations, developers, and so on, ensuring that if somebody did want to come forward and build housing in Turlock, that there are places where they could do that. HCD does establish what is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA, and that is a target number of units that Turlock needs to show that it could accommodate over the planning period. Those are broken down by income group to ensure that the city has sites available not just for large single-family homes that may not be affordable to all people, but also sites that are more appropriate for development of affordable housing. So this is the breakdown of Turlock's RHNA through December of 2023. It's about 3,600 units. It does represent a slight increase from the last period, but it's also important to remember that this planning period is longer than the last period. So relatively speaking, it's about the same. You'll see that these are broken down into very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income categories. Those are determined based on a percentage of the area median income. This is a map that shows the housing sites that we've identified that may be available for development over the planning period. They're color-coded according to their zoning district. You have a number of districts where housing is permitted, from the downtown, more mixed-use type districts, all the way out to medium density, high density, low density, very low density over on the east side. Also, the Morgan Ranch area will serve as an area where we'll see probably a fair amount of housing development accommodating this need over the next 8 years. We have identified enough sites to meet the state's requirements. HCD does permit us to use density as a proxy for determining affordability. We know that that is not a perfect match at all. It is an imperfect measurement. It is what we have to work with. Everybody knows that it is possible to have a luxury high-rise condominium that costs $5 million, and it's possible to have a low-density single-family detached home that costs $80,000. Density does not necessarily equal affordability. However, generally speaking, it is easier to develop more affordable housing at higher densities, which is why that measurement is used. So that is why we break the housing sites down by the densities that their districts permit and use that to establish matching that land supply with the demand in the RHNA. But the long and the short of it is that there are sufficient sites in Turlock at each of these densities to meet its RHNA requirement this cycle. Finally, you do have to identify what your quantified objectives are over the planning period, accounting for new construction, rehabilitation of homes, and conservation of existing affordable units. Again, this represents a target based on your available land and based on the success of previous programs. It's not a requirement, but it is something to strive for. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the section on housing programs. These must cover a whole range of topics, from adequate sites, which we just discussed, to ensuring that you're providing housing for all income groups across the spectrum, the special needs groups that I mentioned before, any efforts to mitigate the constraints that are identified, equal housing opportunities, and energy conservation is also in there. As I mentioned before, the cost of utilities does contribute to people's overall housing costs, so to the extent that energy costs can be reduced, everybody benefits. So we did go through and systematically evaluate all of the housing programs that we had from the last one and identified which ones were still appropriate, worth keeping, should be carried forward, and which ones needed to be revised or removed. New or substantially changed programs include the following. We did update programs that speak to housing for very low income individuals by recognizing the contribution of the Avena Bella development towards meeting that goal. Financial assistance for nonprofits that provide homeless shelter services, we did make a few changes there. It does now specifically mention the mentally ill and chronically disabled as a significant portion of the homeless population, and also identified some newly available federal funding sources that could help with that. We also added a program speaking to support for persons with developmental disabilities. This is a new, in response to new legislation from HCD that asks that we do this, and this is done in partnership with the Valley Mountain Regional Center, which serves Stanislaus County and a number of others in this area for that purpose. We also added a program that encouraged developers of affordable housing to participate in the statewide community infrastructure program. This is another way in which we're trying to make up for the fact that the city no longer has redevelopment funds that were a major source of investment in older parts of town and in generating funds for development of affordable housing. Fee deferrals, here they are. Added a program identifying that the city does do this, ensuring that the city will continue to implement short-term fee deferrals for eligible single-family homes. The rental rehabilitation loans, this is a very successful program. One thing that we discussed with staff was the idea of targeting it more specifically towards seniors who may have reversed mortgages and less cash on hand in order to maintain their homes as they age. Finally, we updated programs on energy efficiency to make sure that they are reflecting the standards that the city currently has, and also to require Energy Star appliances to be used in any rehabilitation projects that the city is funding. There were also a number of programs that we had to remove or really significantly rework. Many of the previous programs did rely on redevelopment agency funding. Those that could continue with another identified funding source, we kept. Those that could not, we removed or deferred. We also removed some programs that relied on one-time funding. For example, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program was one that was used very successfully here. It was a one-time program in response to the foreclosure issue, and that funding is no longer available. And we also removed programs that the city has accomplished. The city did quite a bit of rezoning as a result of the last housing element, and that is now codified, and they don't need to be implementation programs here anymore. The Planning Commission did review the draft and recommended adoption in September. They did recommend at that time including the additional policy on the needs of the developmentally disabled. That's the one I was referring to before. So the revised public review draft you have in front of you does include that. We also received some other comments from a couple of other organizations. Self-Help Enterprises was one. They sent us a letter, again, specifically being concerned about the development impact fees. And we also received another letter from We Care, which offered us some corrections on the data that we had on transitional and supportive housing facilities. So we made those corrections. So other revisions that we made to the draft in response, we added an overview of the comments that we received. We revised the data that we had on transitional housing in response to that new information. We did add a discussion of the possibility of creating a fee deferral program for affordable housing or for high-density development if funding does become available in the future. This is something that I know Debbie had quite a bit of back and forth with the with the organization that submitted this letter on recognizing that it is certainly a priority for the city, yet this is another case in which the funding for this is not currently present. So we're going to keep that as a priority in the element should the funding become available in the future. And then, as I mentioned, we did add the programs that I mentioned before. So our next steps, you will take action this evening, and after that we will, provided that you are happy to adopt the element or could, suggest any revisions to us, we would certainly make them. Then we will send the element to the Department of Housing and Community Development for the mandatory 60-day review period. My experience working with a few other jurisdictions on this so far has been that they are taking less than 60 days. So we hope to hear back from them sooner than that, maybe a month or so. And then there's always a little bit of back and forth with HCD on making sure that we've addressed all of their concerns. And then they would certify the element after they are satisfied with where we've ended up. And again, if they suggest substantial changes to it in policies or programs, we will bring those changes back to you upon getting the final word back from HCD. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks so much. Are there any questions or comments from the council at this point? Yeah, Councilman DeHart. And by the way, it's noted that you saw the skeptical look that the vice mayor had. She always gives that look, so yeah.
Oh, I know.
Councilman DeHart.
Was the skepticism over the timeline, or?
I don't know. Who knows?
I don't think I should ask that. Thank you very much for the presentation. I do have a point of clarification because I'm a bit unsettled as to what we're talking about exactly. When we start talking about special needs groups, whether it be seniors or disabled or extremely low or medium low or alternatively high-low income groups, et cetera, are these standards, are these special need groups overlaid over every community in California, or is it just Turlock?
It is every community in California.
Okay, so if the Bay Area with $1 million homes plus in most areas does not have specifically designated areas for extremely low or low, and we do, what kind of administration are we looking at with respect to the state coming down and saying, okay, Bay Area, you don't have to worry about it because you don't have any place to do it, but Turlock, you're going to have to because you do. Help me understand that whole program.
It's a good question. The process of getting to the RHNA numbers and the allocation begins at the state level and is then narrowed down to every individual jurisdiction. The HCD determines the overall projected housing need statewide. Then that need is broken down by each, I believe it's done by metropolitan planning organization, so in some cases that's just the county. In other places it's a multi-county, like in the Bay Area, for example, it's 9 counties. Here it's just Stanislaus County. So each county is assigned its share of the overall statewide need. And then the county works with the jurisdictions to establish the allocation for each of those cities. However, there are still some commonalities amongst all of the ultimate allocations for each of the cities, and that is that nobody gets away with just saying, oh, we'll provide all the housing for the rich people because we have rich people and, we like them and that's it. If you look at the rough percentages, that pie chart that I showed of what percentage of the units allocated to Turlock are above moderate, which is 120% of area median income or above. Moderate income is between 80 and 120% of the area median income. Low income is between 50 and 80% of AMI, area median income, and very low is less than 50% of the area median income. Those overall percentages are roughly the same for every jurisdiction. So just because I'm the city of, say, Burlingame, and I have, I'm a hillside community in the Bay Area, and most of the land that I have is single-family homes in the hillsides, and there's some area downtown, and I don't have a whole lot of sites left over.
it doesn't mean that they do not have a very hefty allocation for meeting the needs of very low and low-income populations. Typically, those cities have a much more difficult time coming up with the policies and doing rezoning to meet that requirement. It's very challenging for them. It's also important to remember that what constitutes as that area median income also varies substantially throughout the state. It's based on the area median income for the county that you are in. So what qualifies as very low income in San Francisco might qualify as moderate income here. So while it is definitely tailored to each individual jurisdiction in terms of what specifically they're providing for, the burden is intended to be shared amongst all communities.
And I didn't want to be argumentative, but I think that the social engineering that I witness here is a bit problematic for me, and I think for many people that when we start talking about the moderately or lower in the Bay Area may very well be the mid or the higher here. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that I feel picked upon, but if the folks in the Bay Area see a good deal in Turlock, when we're trying to provide for the people that live here, all that does is drive our numbers up. And so I'm trying, is there any consideration given to that, or can there be?
You know, people are going to move about the state for a variety of reasons, and a lot of it does have to do with employment opportunities and, their personal needs, their family, their so on, other interests that they may have, school districts and so on. So the state does not go so far as to say, Turlock, you need to act in such a way that you will prevent people from the Bay Area moving to your town or vice versa. Ultimately, it's really up to the market and, the relative advantages and disadvantages that every place throughout the state offers to people and what they're personally interested in. An example of the state not going so far as to socially engineer per se is by saying, okay, Turlock, San Francisco, whoever, demonstrate to us that you have created conditions in which this housing could be built, but you don't actually have to build it yourself. And this really, I think that it's a testament to how far many cities have come that a lot of these goals have been reached in many places. The density, for example, goes back to a time in which many, many jurisdictions in California had no zoning districts whatsoever that allowed for any high-density development, period. And that's a case in which you really could equate density and affordability. That's not really the case so much in many places anymore, precisely because of things like this. But I think everybody sort of recognizes that you can only go so far in terms of creating conditions that may prompt people to move one place or another.
Any additional questions or comments? From the public, are there any additional questions or comments from the public? Yes, Milt, please come on up. You know the routine. Come on up to the microphone.
Please say your name for the record. Mayor and Council, Milt Treeweiler. Very good presentation. I think actually just following up on what was just mentioned in your question, Bill, as long as we protect ourselves from this residential growth, which we know does not pay for itself, and that's the protection that we have to build in, and that's the protection that Mr. Peacock has been building into it, and that's excellent. We talk about these $39,000 development fees. Okay, I repeat again, residential growth does not pay for itself. It was exemplified right in this room when we had all the mayors here and we discussed the subject. So the way we make it pay for itself is charge these development fees. We don't, the citizens of Turlock don't want to subsidize the housing that's going in Turlock. Let them pay for the new fire. Let them pay for the additional firemen. Let them pay for the additional policemen. We don't need those policemen or firemen until they add houses to our city. So this is the way, by using these assessment districts and the development fees, we can protect ourselves from people moving in just to take advantage of the cheaper prices. Another thing, following up from last week's or last meeting's information, I gave you a chart showing greenhouse gas emissions and what's going on with the CO2. Again, I'm pointing out something. Every time we develop 1 acre of farmland, convert that into residential use, we are increasing the carbon output, the greenhouse gas emissions, by 58 times. Now that was UC Davis research that determined that. So another thing I'm going to point out, I don't have the paper with me tonight, but there was a new study out, and it shows us, that the climate scientists in the world, 99.9% of the climate scientists in the world are telling us that this global warming, global climate change, whatever you want to call it, is man-made. We are causing the problem. We can't get away from this reality. We're going to have to face these facts. We're going to have to live with this situation. It's going to affect us for the rest, it's going to affect our grandchildren more than us, but it will affect them. One last term, I wanted to talk about water needs. Again, when we bring in residential growth, we also have to bring in additional water needs. Okay, it's going to cost us $40 million, $50 million to do the surface water treatment plant, which is a good idea, but I don't want that burden to be placed on the existing citizens who live here now. That should be paid for by the people who are bringing in the need for that. We can get by with the water we have now, and that also includes our industry. So that concludes my presentation tonight, and I will follow up with additional information and additional charts. Again, I think I've told this. I know that one person on this council has heard me say this before. 2 and 2 is not 3. 2 and 2 is 4. That's the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics. And the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics, don't care if you're a Republican, don't care if you're a Democrat, they don't care what religious beliefs you are, they apply to all of us. Thank you.
Thanks. I think you're wrong. We've all heard that from you, so thank you, Mr. Truweiler. Anyone else from the public like to address the council? All right, I'll close public participation and bring it back to the council for consideration. What is the pleasure of the council on this item? Any more discussion as well? Yes.
Introduce the motion and resolution.
All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Bublock, seconded by Councilmember Jacob for the motion and the resolution. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion and resolution carry 5-0. Thank you so much for all your hard work. We really appreciate it. I'm actually going to take this next scheduled matters out of order, Marion, if that's okay. We'll take item 8B, a request to direct staff to issue a request for proposal. Excuse me. I was actually going to take 8C out of order. Excuse me. A request to accept the updated water rate study and affirming the January 2016 water rate increase. I know Director Cook's here, but I think, Garner, you still got this. Yeah. I apologize, staff, for taking this out of order. I just think it'd be good for the sake of your time, if that's okay.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. No worries about taking it out of order. We're always prepared.
All right, I like it.
Item for your consideration tonight is to consider accepting the updated water rate study and affirming the January 2016 rate increase. On March of 2015, City Council approved a series of 6 water rate increases over 5 years and directed staff to conduct an annual review of the revenue and the expenditures to still determine if the next rate increase was justified. Following that, we did retain a consultant, Tom Pavlitek, from
Municipal Financial Services is here tonight to discuss the findings of that report for you, and then I'll follow up if there's any questions after that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members, members of the public. We have about 50 slides, which 12 slides, which we'll quickly go through, and if I talk really fast, I can do it in 6 minutes. So this is what the council did previously, a little over a year ago, adopted 5 years of rate increases, 6 rate increases over 5 years. We reviewed 2 options, a groundwater only or groundwater plus surface water, and council acted on the groundwater only rate schedule. 2 of the 6 rate increases are completed. They were 6 months apart, as you see in bullet 3. And now tonight, you're looking for staff and the consultant's advice on the next rate increase schedule for January 1/16. So that rate increase, the characteristics of it are that your 4 types of charges, commodity for residential and non-res, capacity charge and customer charge are going to go up by varying percentages. The commodity charges go up a little more than the other charges because water conservation acts as a revenue increase in an odd way. The less water you sell, the more the charge would have to go up to remain revenue neutral. So that's why those 2 are going up a little bit more. This is the actual litany menu of rates. So the 2 columns to the left are the past and current charges that were implemented as part of the 5-year rate plan. The next 4 columns, or FY16 through 19, are those that were adopted by council and yet to be implemented. And the highlighted column shows those that are on your plate tonight. And then over to the right 4 columns are charges that we reviewed but were not adopted, only projected. So the groundwater only scenario, when we did our evaluation, we went through and we updated expenditures, we updated customer characteristics, the rate of growth, water sales, and our first hypothesis was to plug in the recommended rates and see if that would still meet our rate objectives. Sufficient revenue, meeting debt service coverage, having sufficient fund balance, allowing you to retain your stable outlook and a good credit rating review. So we went through that, and what our big finding was there's no significant change to the operating and capital costs. You would have known that already since annually you adopt operating capital budgets. So you know that by your past actions on the budget earlier in this, or predating the start of this fiscal year. So what we found was that the rate increases will produce sufficient revenue to meet all our rate making objectives, and that while there was a significant change in water consumption, and we have a few more slides on that, it had only a limited impact on revenue from charges. And for those of you who are budding or fledgling rate consultants, you know why. It's because you get most of your revenue in the mid-60s from the meter charges, the capacity and the customer charges. You only get about 30% of your revenue from the quantity charges. So you're not exposed to big changes in water sales. And the second reason was when we made these rates a year and a half ago, and remember, we made these rates well before anyone knew about a drought. We had, staff and I planned on, we used very conservative estimates of water sales. And we did that because, one, we recognized that you were going to different rate structure that was going to put more of the burden on residential customers, and that there were going to be rate increases, even though it produces only 30% percent of revenue, the perception when you raise the quantity charge is to foster conservation, no matter what the absolute amount of the charge is. For you folks, it's still under $1 per 1,000 gallons. But nonetheless, it was going up by big percentages. So, now a few slides, and we're halfway through the presentation. This shows the water use, actual water use, to the left of the vertical hash line and projected to the right. And these projections, we compared them to the projections we had in the rate study. And the top line is the prior study. And remember, when we produced those projections, we were using data from 2010 through 2012, well before the drought was on anyone's radar. And the purple line below it is our current projections. The space between those two lines, when you integrate it, it's about, as the subtitle says, it's about 700 million gallons. And when you take that the X million gallons per year and multiply the recommended and projected rates, it's about a $4 million difference, reduction in revenues from that we anticipated in the prior study versus this study. And to put the $4 million in context, over that same time period, we anticipated maybe $107 million from rates. So it's a little less than 4% reduction in revenue. And this figure also explains why FY15, which is not on this figure, why the impact of the reduction in water sales was limited on your water enterprise. So one of the ways we use to communicate the complicated story and the interaction between coverage and the increase in monthly bills and expenditures in the stacked columns, fund balance in the black line, and target balance in the red line is to put them all on one figure. So the complexity, it's a double-edged sword. While it's complicated to interpret, once you understand what each of those moving parts does, each of those moving parts is one of the objectives in our rate-making approach. So you can see that we have adequate fund balance, FY21, which is out in the projected years. We give less credence and we have less stress about a low fund balance in the out years because one thing's for sure, in those out years, whatever we have here is not going to be what happens. It's going to be something different. We just don't know which direction it's going to go, so we don't try and over-anticipate it. It's the near-term years, the remaining 4 years of your rate plan that are important to us, and the primary importance is whether the January 1 increases are necessary or not. So what this figure does is say, well, yes, they are still required. The plan you adopted a year and a half ago is still a good one. Although there's been a severe drought, your rate structure and rates have weathered it. No pun intended, but there it is. And that you're going to meet debt service coverage in FY16. Now, a little sidetrack on the debt service coverage. You had your debt rated by Standard & Poor's in 2011 and again in March of 2015. And what they're looking at is what you folks should be looking at also. And here's two of their key comments. First, the one from 2015, that they recognize the importance of the recently approved multi-year schedule of rate increases. Debt rating agencies love certainty. A 5-year rate plan is a very certain thing. To the extent that you change that, you will lead to uncertainty in the eyes of the rating agencies. The other thing that led to their stable outlook was that you have a strong cash position. That's the black line. They had access to our 2014 study, so they're operating from the data from that prior study, and eventually this kind of study will find its way into their hands also. So they're going to see this coverage, this projected coverage, and it's the coverage they really latch on to. That's the whole reason for their rating, is to make sure that the people who lent you the money are going to be repaid. So one of the things they said in 2011, and I'll quote it, that if there's an impact on the ability to maintain strong coverage, that could lend to a negative outlook. So what we did was we modeled a no rate increase, an extreme position to be sure. There's a lot of room to drive between the proposed rate increases and a 0%. But in a 0% world, you would lower your coverage to 148, and it would be trending downward, which is the exact thing they're on the watch for not to happen. So I circled that in the lower left. And then the other bad thing happens later on, where your decrease in fund balance goes beneath your target in FY19, and then I'm sure no one would let this happen. It's a hypothetical construct that it would go negative in FY21. But all that is intended to illustrate is that the less you do now, the more you have to do later, assuming that the capital and operating costs we modeled are reasonable and nearly correct. Now that's probably a better assumption for the groundwater only scenario than the surface water. So we also looked, before we do our comps, we looked at the groundwater plus surface water as we did in the last study, and we used the same costs, operating and capital, that we had a year and a half ago, which means those costs are more outdated than they were even then. A condition that's likely to change soon, as you know from your other agenda items in future weeks, and the thing that puts Michael Cook not here tonight. They're looking at those surface water plans and costs. But the one thing we can see, the writing on the wall already, if those costs remain the same, that the rate increases are going to be a little bit higher and a little bit longer than they were a year and a half ago. Those 4 years of 25% they weren't all 25%. I didn't bring up the same chart, but it's slightly higher now. Let me go back a couple slides to look at our monthly bill survey, and this is based on the rates to be implemented on Jan 1. And to the right of the vertical column, vertical line, are bills based on those rates, current, and then going into projected. And I just noticed the label on the column stack bars to the right is incorrect. That's the projected bill. And the small type that you probably can't read it tells you what the basis for the bill is. It's 15 units and a 1-inch meter, 15,000 gallons. And this was just the prelude to the surface water plus groundwater figure, just to say in text what I verbalized. Same costs, and the rate increases will be slightly higher. And then finally, to bring it all together, we have the historical bills since FY12 to date in the black line, and then the red line would be the bills based on the recommended and then projected rates out in the blue shaded area. The purple line is the groundwater plus surface water rates associated with that plan. And our recommendation is to adopt the rates slated for January 1.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions or comments from the council for Tom on his presentation, or Garner at this time? Councilmember Bublack.
So, for Garner, please. First of all, comment, I'm not a real advocate for fee increases. I struggle with that. So, having said that, I understand the 218 process, but is there some way that maybe you and staff could come back with some concept for seniors, subsidization for seniors and low-income, fixed-income people? I think it would be more palatable for me to, with the idea of the concept of Social Security is not going to get any more money, people aren't, on fixed incomes don't have anything. Is there any way that you could come back with something to kind of offset it?
For a 218 process, the state law does not provide that opportunity for us to subsidize rates, but if the city was to look at other funding sources, some other funding sources could be the general fund or potentially the fines that we place on water conservation or other ideas we can come up with. As long as we're not using the water rates to subsidize that, then that's something that we could look into. And that's something that, if that's council's direction, we can provide that information and bring it back to you at a future date. I know there's a water update, I believe. We're looking at the first part of December. We maybe I'll have some information on that if that's your direction.
Okay. Yeah, there's questions or comments? Yes, City Manager, please.
And we should recognize that there is inherent in the amount of water you use savings that will occur.
Correct.
So as they become older or senior, if they lower their water use like some have, there will be an associated lowering of cost. And that's probably worth looking at also.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Nascimento and then DeHart.
Gar, just to clarify, so the rate increase that's being suggested tonight is the increase, it's still groundwater only, correct?
That is correct. That was the one that was recommended in the previous study.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember DeHart.
Much in keeping with what Vice Mayor just mentioned, Garner, I know, and actually, Tom, back to your presentation, debt agencies, lending agencies, they like the dependability. The certainty that expenses and costs and all of those, and then revenues are going to remain somewhat constant and predictable. But in keeping with what Vice Mayor said, you know, some of us would like some sort of dependability that these rates, certainly understand the necessity for adjustment, but it just seems to me that if there's some way to begin to address whether it's a CPI, whether it's there is no increase for Social Security, whether there's we spent a lot of time this evening talking about extremely low and low income households. It just seems to me there's got to be some sort of consideration given for those special need groups or special designated groups, whatever we want to call them. But a blanket template application just seems to me to be a bit excessive in many cases. So at whatever point we get something back, whether that's December or whatever, perhaps there'd be something in there on that.
So we'd be looking for like a low income type subsidy type fee, not fee, I'm sorry, but a rate and or a senior rate or both?
Well, I think we could call it the special need group. Okay. We just had that presentation, and we've got, I think we hit every single one of those categories in our community. And it just seems to me that there ought to be some sort of application that we could make that would say it would be appropriate for whether this is the criterion for this group or that is the criterion for a different group, that it would be some sort of striated structure that would accommodate all.
I think avoiding the word subsidy would be good. I don't want it to feel like we're trying to skirt the intent of 218 or anything. I agree. Which that's not what we're doing. It's just very separate. But
yeah, we can look into that and probably bring back some options for funding on that.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments from the council at this time? What was with the model? And Tom, you might be able to talk about this. Can you talk about the accuracy of your original when it was adopted? I know that this is the yearly review to adopt the rate increase, but can you talk about the accuracy of the model? Is it hitting on target? Are we way off?
Well, it's on target. There was no substantial change in the expenditures. Mm-hmm. Those stacked blue, purple, and red columns. And the only change was the change in revenues from rates. Mm-hmm. but that was mitigated by the rate structure you chose to adopt, where you get much of your revenue from the commodity and capacity charges and not so much from the commodity charge. And by the fact that when we projected water sales in our prior model for FY15 and 16, these early years, we were not far from the actual sales. Even though the drought wasn't really there, we had, when you hire a rate consultant, you are tasking us to produce rates that with almost 100% certainty are going to get the job done. The last thing we want as a basis of our recommendation is to come back and say, well, you don't have enough revenue, now you got to change your rate schedule and do another 218. So we always lean to the getting enough revenues with the realization that once you adopt things, you can always not raise the rates as much as you wanted. So you suffered through getting that plan done, getting our assumptions on board, and we listed all our assumptions a year and a half ago. And it turns out for FY15, our sales were fairly close. FY16, you saw the departure between the two in this slide. But because you get your, the charge is 58 cents for single family, and that's 600 million units or 600 units, it's not a significant dent in your revenues. So the accuracy is very good considering the variables we're working with that simply cannot be, some of them, foreseen. For example, we don't know if the governor is going to extend the drought mandate, what's going to be up his sleeve, and we don't know that the purple line is going to be right a year from now, which is one of the reasons we counsel continued risk avoidance in terms of what you do with your rates. Because if you make the wrong move now, you're only going to have to double down later, probably sooner than later. And we already know that we've got more increases on the horizon, which can only go one direction if you fail to act now, or if the variables turn against you. Not so much the expenditures, operating and capital, which you review every year anyway as part of your budget cycle. It's mostly the water use issue that a year and a half ago, no one in this room would have dreamed we'd be going through what we are now, not just Turlock, but statewide.
Right. Councilman DeHart.
And I think that's why we're questioning, in many ways, not the wisdom of the policy that we established as much as we've kind of arrived at a point of perfect storm. We have rates that must increase in some capacity. We have an absence of or a lack of available resource to sell. We have a mandated reduction in usage. We have a penalty for using too much. We have no cost of living increase for some folks who are of that persuasion. We have many situations where we're kind of wondering, okay, how in the world do we get from where we are today to where we need to be at the end of 2016, launching into 2017? And the only people that seem to be satisfied in the whole situation are the banks and the lending institutions and the regulatory agencies who are now somewhat assuaged and are have achieved some sort of dependability because our rate structure is such that they can be have a little faith. And so we're kind of struggling with some of this stuff. I think you see my point. And do we need to conserve? Absolutely. I think any one of a number of us could speak to that and do so effectively. We just had recognized somebody earlier this evening, an institutional place that is near and dear to all of us who conserved massive amounts of water. And on scale, I think there's individual citizens that have conserved massive amounts of water. But that doesn't let us off the hook. I understand the delivery, the hookup, I understand all of those pieces, but there's got to be some sort of common sense injected back into the formulation that says, hey, how do we get to the end of 2016, beginning 2017, and beyond? So that's all I'm asking for, is a little bit of data that says, hey, is there any way to help?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
the other item, that Garner will come back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilman Jacob.
I have sort of a twofold question. The chart that you had up a while ago that had the different fees of the with different years.
Yeah.
Can somebody speak to why there's a difference between single, multi-residential, and commercial industrial?
Yes, it's because of
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, we had established that, made the findings that supported those different quantity charges, commodity charges in the prior study, and it deals with the peaking characteristics of each customer class. And the larger the peaking, whether it be day, hour, or the combination of those, the more costs it exerts on the enterprise. So the best way to understand it is, if there was no peaking at all, how much smaller your system could be, right? So there'd be less capital costs, less R&R maintenance of those assets that you install, and your operating costs would be lower. But each of those customer classes, and the reason we categorize them as we did, they each had similar peaking characteristics. So the higher the rate landscape, the more pronounced their peaking characteristics are.
Okay. And then second part of kind of along that same vein is the rate increases differ between each of the years. So from 2015, single multi-residential went up 6 cents, whereas commercial went up 3 cents, and landscape went up 5 cents. Can you speak to why those go up different?
Right. They're not across the board rate increases. All the rates you see here are cost of service rates, which means every number on that, in that table, has a numerator and a denominator. So when the numerator changes at a different rate than the denominator, you're going to get a different percent increase, which means in single and multi-residential, there's more conservation going on. So the rate has to do two things. Not only bring in enough revenue, it's got to do it with less sales. So that rate has to go up at a higher percentage than the other rates. There's not as much conservation in the commercial, industrial, institutional class. And in the landscape, we modeled more conservation. So the short answer is they're cost to service rates, not across the board rate increases.
Any other questions or comments? All right, if not, I'm going to open it up to the public. Milk, come on up. We had so many comments up here, I didn't know if I'd opened it for public comments or not yet, so I have to remember. But you would remind me, I'm sure.
I can wait.
I know.
No, once again, a good presentation. And, realistically, the price of water is going to go up. It has to go up. But there are some things that haven't been mentioned. And again, the one thing that I see that hasn't been mentioned is the fact that when we pay for the surface water treatment plant, this is going to cost millions of dollars. And I don't see how we're putting that into the formula. We're talking about it, but I don't see how it's included in the formula as to how we're going to pay for it. So when we get heavy water users in the industrial class, and that does justify changing the price of the industrial water because their water usage is going to be pretty steady. I could cut my water usage back to 4,000 gallons a month, which I'm doing, yet we have other residents that are using 100,000 gallons a month. The tiered rate is still an option. It's not, I don't understand the particulars of a tiered rate, but I know that many cities in California are using a tiered rate, and it can be justified because of the additional cost it's going to cost to acquire the additional water that's needed for these people that are using so much water, the 100,000 gallon a month users. That's over 1 million gallons a year. Does a household need to use over 1 million gallons of water in a year? That seems a little bit excessive to me. So again, I think we should explore options with the tiered rate, how we can do it legally. I know we have to meet the 218 requirements, but how we could actually use tiered rates legally. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public? Yes, please.
In coming here, I never actually saw myself coming up here and talking, and
twice
for that, and it's quite a long walk up here. And I'm certainly not as articulate as Milt, so I hate to follow him up, but I know everybody in this room realizes that we're in a crisis over water, and probably for the past 5 years, I've followed loosely the global water shortage. I can't quote you sources, however, I do know that according to much of what I have researched and learned myself, there's less than 1% of drinkable water on this planet left, and it's getting worse, and it troubles me to sit here and listen about all these numbers. We project 5 years ahead or whatnot, and it's going to increase this much. And I don't have all the facts of what's going into making all these estimations and such, nor do I know about all the financial interests in it. And that in itself seems like a conflict of interest, where there's lenders looking for a stable flow of income, at our expense. I'm looking at, I'm proud father of a 5-year-old little boy, and everything I do goes into preparing him for the future. And I often think about what sort of future that there's going to be. There's already, and I can't recall which South American countries that have defaulted on loans, that have had to basically give up their own water rights to big corporations like Nestle, where laws were enacted preventing them from saving water and retrieving rainwater. I know that that's not something that is going to happen here, but we are headed for dire times, and these short-term projections seem, I don't know, maybe there's something to it, but from where I sit, just a common citizen, it doesn't sound like much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public at this time? Okay. I'm going to close public participation and bring back to the council. Are there any additional comments or questions or anything from the council before we move on? If not, I'm going to – oh, do you have a comment? Oh, I just have had a few comments. One of the questions that was posed was about the surface water agreement, and there's a lot of unknowns still. We have a raw water agreement in place, but we're still trying to look at partners, and someone alluded to it earlier that Modesto is contemplating that tonight. They're continuing participation in the agreement, and what does that look like, and what does it look like with other communities getting involved, smaller communities. And so that rate study will come into play later on, but I think there still needs to be a discussion about groundwater only, which is the here and now about the rate increase. And so that will be a robust discussion that we have, and it will most likely have an impact on rates. At the same time, I'm going to also shamelessly plug Thursday night. This Thursday night on October 29th, there's going to be a workshop on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and what that means to the Turlock groundwater basin. And if you're that concerned as the public about our groundwater situation and what we can do, I love your international exposure and talking about things happening abroad, but we can talk about things here at home that we need to do. And so that workshop will address key aspects of the Act and then what we're going to do going forward. I think Director Cook's going to be speaking on behalf of the cities. TID is going to be there. And so I really encourage the participation of our community in that Groundwater Management Act because they're all interconnected. We are being good stewards of our groundwater. We're being good stewards of the water that we've been given. These rates are very conservative in the fact that they are based off cost of service. We're not making a profit off of these rates. Legally, I don't think we're allowed to. So we will explore all options to keep those costs down, but I think that this is something that we need to do and it's necessary. And again, if you want to be involved in that this Thursday at 6 p.m. at the Sears Community Center, we're going to be talking about this in depth. So with that, my comments are done, and I'll open it to Councilmember Bublock.
So I trust that our staff is going to be able to provide some compensation to assist with the seniors and those with fixed income. So having said that, I will go ahead and introduce the motion.
All right. We have a motion by Councilmember Bublock with the guidance that she just stated, and a second by Councilmember DeHart, which I'm assuming he agrees with that guidance. Absolutely. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much, Tom, for all of your hard work. Thank you, Garner, and to Director Cook back there. All right, now we're going to skip back up to 8A, request to adopt new policies and procedures for administering a monitoring program for the Community Development Block Grant Program by the City of Turlock.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before I begin, I just wanted to make one comment that when we did the screening for all the families that came in and ultimately moved into Avena Bella, all of them had come from within about an 8 to 10 mile radius, with the exception of one family who had family here who was relocating from San Diego. And so I just don't want there to be the myth that we're building things so that other people from the Bay Area can come here and take advantage of what we've made in terms of an investment for our local people to be able to afford to live here in quality, affordable housing. The item before you this evening is an incremental kind of review and then drafting and implementation of additional policies and procedures in how we run our federal grants programs. This one, we didn't realize that we still had missing as part of our complement. And is in response basically to the auditor's question about our own particular specific monitoring. Not that we don't and haven't done it, but that it was codified in an actual plan. So with regard to that, we've gone through all of these. These have been reviewed by HUD, and we ask tonight that you adopt these new policies and procedures that deal specifically with administrating a monitoring program for our CDBG funds as outlined in the attachment that was provided in the staff report.
Thank you so much. Are there questions or comments from the council? All right, I'm going to open it up for public. Are there questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, closing public participation, bringing it back to the council. What is the pleasure of the council?
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Jacobs, second by Councilmember Bublock. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much, Mayor. Moving on to 8B, a request to do one of two things. One, direct staff to issue a request for proposal, recommend a consultant and budget amendment for the update to the downtown design guidelines and zoning regulations. Or, number two, request to postpone the update to the downtown design guidelines and zoning regulations until an outside funding source can be identified and revisit in 2 years with the update to the Mayor and City Council policy goals and implementation plan. Debbie.
This item is before you tonight to fulfill one of the implementation measures in the Policy Goals and Implementation Plan. Under your Policy Goal 6, Intelligent, Planned, and Managed Growth, you had asked staff to come back to you with some funding options for the downtown plan update. And just to kind of refresh everyone about the reason for the downtown plan update is during the development of the general plan, there was a great deal of interest in looking at the downtown plan to see if we can kind of refashion it so that we can attract more development into the downtown, whether that was to create more flexible uses for the downtown, to look at our setback requirements and our standards, and then to kind of more generally maybe broaden the area that we have defined for the downtown plan. But I think probably more interesting is to kind of look at how can we really attract more uses into the downtown. The scope of work that is presented in the staff report was one that was developed to respond to a funding round that was provided by the Sustainable Growth Council. They had funding available to fund different kinds of community planning activities, and what we came up with as part of that scope of work was really kind of moving our area of focus around to look at what are the standards that we need in the downtown to make it more attractive to the development community, to businesses that want to locate here. So really looking more from the developer or the business standpoint, what can we do with our standards from a governmental standpoint? What other kinds of incentives can we look at, whether those are taxing incentives or there are other kinds of, lending practices that we can take advantage of to actually make it more doable for development to come into the downtown. So I'm pretty excited about the prospect of doing this type of plan, but I know it's going to cost a lot of money. And as you can see in the scope of services that we provided for the last update, we were looking at about $500,000. Even if we were to sort of downscope this type of effort, just because of the breadth of the issues that we would undertake, you're probably looking at about a $300,000 to $400,000 project. And that would be working with the community, really getting out there, trying to understand what the market conditions are, what is the potential for Turlock to attract different kinds of uses into its downtown, and then reevaluate all of its zoning code to basically support the development community and coming into the downtown. So that's a lot of work, and that's also something that we have to do in conjunction with the community, because we're going to attract the kinds of businesses that might be perceived as sort of changing the nature of the downtown and perhaps even coming in conflict with some of the existing development there. So the question that really is before you tonight is this something that you want to move forward with? We have worked with Townsend Public Affairs. There are lobbyists that kind of help us to identify different funding sources. Frankly, the grant opportunity that we applied for back in 2011 is no longer available. There are no federal or state funding sources that are available for community planning activities. The state has kind of refocused its efforts from planning over to implementation, so they're really looking for more of the projects to actually fund at this point with that funding source. We've even looked to the Caltrans planning grants to see if those might be funding opportunities for us. And basically, Richard Harmon has come back to us and said, look, there really isn't any outside funding available. So the only funding that would really be available to you would be the general fund, and we know how precious that is. So that's why we're presenting the two options for you. We'll continue, of course, to look for any available grant opportunities, but the deadline for this particular action was December of 2015, so I wanted to bring it back to you just as soon as we could so that you could make this decision.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for Debbie? You laid it on thick. That was sorry. Councilmember Nascimento.
Debbie, Brian, what was the original funding source for the downtown design guidance when they were first initiated? Was that staff action, or did we go to bid for that?
For the original scope, that was going to be the Sustainable Communities Program that the state basically put together using the Prop 84.
When we originally developed the downtown design guidelines, when the document was first created.
That funding source, that would have been general fund.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Councilman Jacob. It's getting late.
I think I have some reservations moving forward with this in a budget cycle where we're in a deficit. I don't know can you speak to maybe the urgency of doing it right away and putting us more into
Well, I think that's
money that we
what
don't
I've
really
kind of
have?
presented is that it's probably not as urgent. I mean, we do have an item that will be coming to you in December to move forward with a portion of the original scope that looks at the parking issues in downtown. And so I think that's a good first step in looking at what we can do in the downtown to kind of make the area more attractive. This is something that could be pushed off. It's just that, we do want to keep it in front of you. It's an item that we want to get back to as part of our general plan implementation. But I think the fact that there is no available funding source out there, again, it's a very precious general fund dollar. So we really just wanted to present it to you so you could make the decision.
City Manager, yeah.
Mayor and Council, there's certainly the investment side of this, which is to bring some, your downtown is thriving and there's great interest in the downtown. And so there's the investment side of this in creating the surety that comes with a planning document that helps the investment recognize where they can safely and move forward. That said, rather than waiting 2 years, you could certainly ask staff to bring this back as we close out the fiscal year to see, how are things going, what's going on, is there a portion of it, maybe you end up with a surplus that you could direct towards this, but certainly something that maybe you would keep higher than a 2-year review with the plans and objectives.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, Councilman Jacob.
I think that would probably be a more appropriate approach, is to deal with this when we are going through the budget review, because, it is general fund dollars. And
Do you want to bring it back as soon as 2 months from now when we revisit the budget in December for amendments, or the following fiscal year, so it would be next summer? Or are we on, what did we switch to?
You'll close the fiscal year on July 31st. We'll know the standing fairly quickly after that. We have a good sense as we come into the close of the year where we're at, but we typically in this time frame are actually taking the action to close the fiscal year.
Okay.
I think
go on, Councilmember Jacob still.
Either time is fine. I just would want to do it in a way that we can prioritize this spending with all the other wish list items that we have coming before us, and see if that, prioritize it, see if this is actually something that we need to put ahead of, a wide range of things that the city can use.
Great. Councilman Nassimo.
What's the, I know that development's picking up and staff has a lot more work these days. What is the ability, or is there any ability to do this in-house? I know that Modesto went through a similar effort. I believe they did it in-house. And just kind of wondering, would it just take a long time? Is it something that we could sort of pick away at internally, or is it something that we really feel that needs to go out to a consultant?
I personally think it needs to go out to a consultant, because we're really we're proposing to do an analysis here that looks at the market as opposed to just the design guidelines. If we were doing something like Modesto where they did form-based code, those are things that are more design-oriented that your staff is perfectly capable of doing. But in order to really look at it from whether or not what kinds of uses could we market Turlock toward, and kind of evaluate what the barriers are for development. We've talked to a number of developers that tell us that, our fees are too high. We don't have, we don't provide for, high enough height limits to make the kind of development that would come into the downtown work. So we need to kind of understand what are those barriers, and that's not really something that we're equipped to do. So there are parts of it we could do, but I think you want to do the design considerations in conjunction with trying to understand the market and what the potential is for the city, and that's going to really require somebody from the outside that has more of that kind of economic perspective, and then also someone that can kind of deal with the creativity as to what could the downtown of Turlock be if it were to open up its design guidelines.
So in the meantime, if our design guidelines are becoming a hindrance for any particular development project, then they can always apply as a planned development and get some way around. So there's
but I think it goes back to what the city manager was saying, is that it doesn't create that kind of development certainty that the development community is interested in. They don't want to have to go through these processes. We've seen this unfold in the last couple of meetings, where someone who is asking for a building that's a little higher than what we typically have in the city, they encounter a great deal of resistance. And so most developers, if they can't come in and they're doing a staff level type of permit, they usually don't go forward. And particularly with the downtown, when it's so low profile, coming in with a relatively high profile building is going to probably elicit a great deal of opposition.
Any other questions or comments? Councilman DeHart?
Yeah, I think, Mayor, if I've said it once, I've heard it at least 3 or 4 times, that we all have in some way benefited from the legacy of planning, whether it be the Planning Commission or the direction from previous councils, with respect to being more proactive about how we establish guidelines, what kinds of projects do we approve or give authorization to. And so I think at the appropriate time, and the cautions are very well taken, I think that there's no disagreement there. But I think that I'd probably rather see it sooner than later. I think that our investment in a program that's going to come up with a proposal for planning, for those guidelines, for the marketability study is very appropriate at the right time. The caveat there, so.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments before I open it up to the public? All right, it's open to the public. Yes, Mr. Trueweiler. Please state your name, your address, and your water conservation rate, please. That's right.
Mayor and Council, I think, you want to take this very cautiously. I don't believe in subsidizing residential growth. I don't believe in subsidizing downtown growth. I mean, this is basically a subsidy for downtown growth. They're doing fine now. They're doing wonderful now. We've had an uptake from 2007. We've had the longest increase in growth that we've ever seen in our history. There's going to be a down coming up here. We want to save our money, $500,000. That's $500,000. Let's save our money today. 2 years from now, we'll see what's happening. We could really need that money 2 years from now and say, wow, that's $500,000 we just blew on the downtown, and we're not getting anything from it because we've hit that peak and we're going down. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the council for consideration. Councilmember Bublak.
I agree that we don't have the funding now, and I can only hope that as everything keeps flowing, there's opportunity between today and the next 2 years for some other type of funding. You never know what the government's going to throw your way or take from you. So having said that, I would recommend option 2.
All right. We have a motion and a second, but I will take your last comments.
Yeah, just the last comment. I do appreciate the need to invest in our downtown. I think Councilmember DeHart made that comment. It is an investment. But it is, as Councilmember Jacob pointed out, it's about prioritizing all the needs of the city, and that becomes very, very difficult in our current fiscal situation. And so it is probably more prudent to take this up with the budget as a whole so that we can accurately prioritize this. But it certainly is a priority, and we thank you for presenting this to us. I just, for a point of clarification, I know that Councilmember Jacob had maybe a different time he wanted this to come back besides the 2 years. I don't know if that, because option B is 2 years.
I heard at the end of the fiscal year. Is that what you wanted, or do you want it sooner than that? So, Councilmember Bublak, at the end of the fiscal year, so this summer, or do you want it sooner?
Option 2 says 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years or if something comes before us earlier.
Well, that's the thing. So 2 years or sooner.
Funding opportunities.
So can we say no later than 2 years?
That's better.
Okay,
So,
very good.
Okay, so all right. So the amendment is no later than 2 years. Motion by Councilmember Bublak, seconded by Councilmember Jacob, thirded by Councilmember Nascimento. Clerk, please call the roll. Oh, yeah, fourth by, yeah. It's just me.
Yes.
How's he going to vote?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much. Thank you, Debbie. Eric, you're up. Request to affirm or modify the community events and activities grants funding as submitted by the Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission.
This is the second round of funding for the 15-16 year. We set aside $46,000 for the community grants. At the September 8th council meeting, we had 9 organizations that were awarded $40,250, leaving a balance of $5,750. As directed by council, staff opened up a second funding cycle and received 2 completed grant applications totaling $7,000, $1,250 over the amount budgeted. Both organizations did present at the October 14th Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission meeting, and the commission scored the events based on the information contained in the application and the organization's presentation. Attached in your guys' packet, you do have an Exhibit A that outlines the event's funding request and the cumulative scores to help you as you look at the funding levels for these 2 events. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments for, yes, Councilman Jacob? Or no?
All right, let me find my place. first of all, thank you very much for all the work that has gone into this. I know that you and Allison have put a great deal of time and effort in sitting on the subcommittee with Councilmember Nascimento and trying to create this process. I'm very pleased with the results that we were able to achieve in our first funding cycle, and my comment would be that I'm very proud of the process that we have created, and I would not want us to deviate in any way from what the Park Arts and Recreation Commission has recommended. So I think that we need to take their rating seriously and fund them in order of and if there's any sort of difference of $1,250 to modify the lower ranking application.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the council? Yeah, Councilman Nascimento.
Trying to do my math here. Just to try to be fair to both of these events, I do appreciate their recommendation, and I think we gave them good guidance, and they've given us good recommendations. I just wonder, because we have these two, if we might be able to sort of split that money on a percentage basis where each of them get 80% or something, a percentage that works out where we expend the full remainder sort of evenly based on their request. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly that number is, but I think it might be close to 75% of what they were asking.
Yeah, this is a discussion, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Councilman Jacob.
My only reservation there, and honestly, I'm a member of the Assyrian Civic Club. That's the lower ranking one. So if anything, I should have a bias in their favor, is that, they did score roughly 10 percentage points, the cumulative average, the way that the commissioners scored them, less. So I don't think that reducing the amount of funding for the Turlock Junior Rodeo would, just because the balance is, it goes above, would be a fair thing to do.
Sorry, I'm not being difficult. Are you trying, so clarify, so you would keep?
I would keep full funding for, at least in my opinion, I would think that we would, in order to honor the process that we've put in place, we should fully fund the Turlock Junior Rodeo's request for $2,000, and whatever is left over, we can do a reduced funding amount of what comes out to be $3,750 for the Assyrian State Convention.
Okay.
How much would it be? I'm sorry.
$3,750.
Yeah. So I guess my proposal wouldn't change that much either, because it would basically be $4,100 for them, and so the difference really isn't that much. So we're talking about a couple $100. Okay.
But you want to make kind of more strike a precedent in keeping,
Yeah.
affirming what we have. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Right. I just want to honor the process that's been put in place and the commissioners that took the time to actually rate these and hear both applications, and and their findings were considerably more favorable for the Turlock Junior Rodeo, and so I think to honor that, I think that it would just make sense for us to not dock them solely because the second ranking applicant exceeds the total amount of funding that was available.
Great.
I'll say, sitting on that committee, I think that's probably a good precedent to set, and so I think that's a good argument, and we've made the rules, so we should enforce them. So yeah, I would tend to agree with Councilmember Jacob on that point.
Councilman DeHart? All right. Let me open it up to the public, if that's okay with the council. Anything from the public? This is your time. All right. I'm going to close public participation, bring it back to the council for consideration. What say you? I'm looking left or right. Yeah, there we go.
I will introduce, sorry, is it a motion? The resolution to fully fund the highest ranking applicant in the amount of $2,000, and then the remainder of $3,750 for the second ranking applicant.
I will.
Sorry, clarification. So you're affirming the community events and activities grants funding as submitted by the Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission? City Attorney?
I don't think they made a funding recommendation.
They did not.
They
They just
simply
weren't.
ranked them, and then we brought it forward to the council for.
Okay. Okay, there we go.
I will second the resolution.
That's all we want, City Attorney. All right. Hey, acting chief. So we have a green light for the city attorney on the new equipment, so she can hit a green light if our motions are good, red if it's bad. Yeah.
We just need a red light that just flashes in front of us.
Or a horn. All right. We have a motion by Councilmember Jacob, second by Councilmember Nascimento for whatever Councilmember Jacob said. Clerk, please call the roll. Oh my God.
Green light.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Clerk is not playing along. All right, moving on to item E. We are pulling item E, but City Manager, can you explain, please?
Mayor, we're still waiting to hear on the SAFER grant, and in order to avoid any confusion, I'd recommend that we pull this and hear it in the November meeting.
Absolutely, I think it's the most prudent thing. Thank you. All right, moving on to item F, a request to authorize the issuance of a request for proposal to conduct an executive recruitment for the position of city manager. Authorize the mayor to enter into a professional services agreement with a recruitment firm to conduct executive recruitment for the position of city manager in an amount not to exceed $30,000 and appropriate $30,000 from Fund 110 General Fund Reserve Balance to account number 110-10-102.47090. Kelly Jacobs Hunter. How are you?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm good, thank you. That was good for
Yeah.
so late in the evening. The item before you is asking for authorization from the council to issue a request for proposal for executive recruitment services for the position of city manager. And then also asking if once we issue the RFP, we receive them back and they're reviewed, authorizing the mayor to enter into the professional services agreement with the recruitment firm that's selected, and also asking to appropriate the funds to pay for the executive recruitment. And I've included everything in the packet, the RFP, everything for everyone's review. Tomorrow I will email out to all the California executive recruitment firms that we have a RFP available on our website, and that's how we'll get the word out.
Great, pretty straightforward. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from the council? All right, seeing none, I'm going to open. Yes, Councilman Jacob, I'm sorry.
Are we, and I know that this is pretty routine, we're doing this currently for the fire chief and whatnot, but by putting this 30,000 figure out in advance, are we not sort of showing our hand of how much we're willing to pay for something? I'm not really sure how that works.
Well, it is competition, so, I mean, the firms may see that, but it is, it's a competitive bid process, so.
So this is a maximum that we are approving?
Yeah, and if for some reason, which I do not suspect, that it would come back higher than that, I'd have to return to get authorization.
Okay.
Correct. Any other questions or comments from the council? Opening it up to the public. Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close it for public comment and bring it back to council. Councilman Nascimento.
I have a question for the city attorney. Are we able to introduce the motions and resolutions together? Without objection from the council, I'd like to introduce both motions and the resolution as stated on the agenda.
Second.
Efficiency. All right, we have a motions and resolution introduction by Councilmember Nascimento, second by Councilmember DeHart. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes, motions and resolution carry 5-0. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you, Kelly. Moving on to items, council items for future consideration. Looking to my left. Looking to my right. Moving on. Council comments. Looking to my left. Councilman DeHart.
Yes, Mayor. I missed an opportunity last meeting to provide at least a verbal, abbreviated report on my attendance, along with Councilmember Jacob, to the League of California City Annual Convention. It was a power-packed 2.5 days with respect to multiple seminars, opportunities to interact on topics such as water, homelessness, neighborhood or community policing. There was a lot of topics. I'm still in the middle of providing my summary to the city manager. But wonderful experience from the standpoint of getting back home and going, I sure am glad to be back home, because interacting with members of other city councils and hearing some of the challenges that they face made coming home a welcome experience. So great opportunity, and I think I'll be able to dish out some of the material that I gathered once I get it more formalized.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
If I can,
Councilman
echo,
Jacob, yeah.
echo that. Just sometimes you don't realize how good you have it until you hear the experiences of other people. So, and there were just, there was also an expo at that event, and I tried to make my way to each of the booths to talk to the different vendors, and they were just singing Turlock's praises. So, bravo to staff for all the great work that you guys are doing.
Nice. Council member Bublak.
So I wanted to thank all of staff who got the public safety open house going. It was a great turnout, and I had a good time, as well as Councilmember DeHart and the mayor. And then as well, if you guys all want to get up early and hear the mayor talk some more, he's going to be at the chamber breakfast tomorrow, 7:30 at the golf course.
Thanks. That's nerve-wracking. All right, any other questions or comments? Comments? Yes, Councilman Nascimento.
Point out for the record that we get a little punchy after 8:30, so we should probably try to keep the meeting.
You guys should see what happened in closed session. It's crazy. All right, I just have two quick comments. I already said it earlier, but there is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act workshop that's going to be for the communities of Turlock series, those in the Turlock groundwater sub-basin. I really encourage folks to come. It's at, I believe it's at 6 p.m. at the Ceres Community Center on this Thursday. It's extremely important, and we need to show up and have that dialogue and have that discussion. And then second, as you guys know, I left the last council meeting early to go down to Los Angeles for the U.S. Conference of Mayors Water Council, which I sit on, and I presented on our North Valley Regional Recycled Water Project. It was very exciting to talk about what we're doing here in Turlock and in the region, about how we're taking our water fate into our own hands, how we are being proactive, we are making the right investments at the right times, even when it hurts a little bit at this time. So we're taking recycled water, and the fact that Turlock is going to be a major player in the nation's largest recycled water project that puts recycled water to beneficial use is remarkable. It's extremely something that we should be proud of, and so I was very happy to have been able to present on that. So thank you for that opportunity to the city of Turlock, and thank you, Councilman DeHart, for continuing the tradition of reporting back on when we ever travel out on city business. We do need to be accountable to the public and explain what we've been doing and why it's beneficial to the city of Turlock. So that was really good. All right, closed session, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to adjourn to closed session to consider item 11A and B. All the relevant information is set forth on the agenda.
All right. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Do I have a motion by Councilmember DeHart, second by Councilmember Jacob to adjourn? All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.